The sound of my phone clattering to the floor echoed through the empty diner at 2 in the morning. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The message on the screen was simple. Just 7 words from my mother, Eleanor. But those 7 words shattered everything I thought I knew about family. You have 10 minutes. Pack and leave. Below it was a photo, the photo that would haunt me for months to come. My childhood bedroom, the one place that had ever felt like mine, was completely empty. Bare walls where my father's paintings used to hang. Stripped mattress where I had cried myself to sleep countless nights. Even the small wooden box where I kept Dad's watch, the last thing he ever gave me, was just gone. Like I had never existed at all. But before we go any further, if you are enjoying this story of resilience and finding strength in the darkest moments, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming toxic relationships and rebuilding your life. Your support means everything, and I read every single comment you leave. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. 6 months earlier, I was a completely different person. My name is Ava Mitchell, and at 22 years old, I genuinely believed that if I just tried hard enough, if I was just good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, my mother would finally see me, really see me, not as the inconvenient reminder of my father's death, not as the obstacle standing between her and her perfect new life with my stepsister Chloe, but as her daughter, as someone worthy of love. I was working 2 jobs back then, waitressing at a downtown restaurant during the day and doing data entry from home at night. Every single paycheck I dutifully handed over 60% to my mother. She said it was for rent, for food, for my share of the utilities in the house where I had grown up, the house my father had bought, the house that should have been half mine after he died. But I never questioned it. I never questioned anything Eleanor demanded, because questioning her meant risking the one thing I desperately needed to believe in, that somewhere deep down, she cared about me. My father died when I was 15. He was a meticulous accountant, the kind of man who kept records of everything, who taught me that numbers never lie, even when people do. He died suddenly, a heart attack at his desk, and with him went the only person who had ever made me feel like I mattered. Mom remarried within a year to Richard, a wealthy investment banker who came with a daughter my age, Chloe, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I remember the first time Eleanor made her preferences crystal clear. It was my 16th birthday, 3 months after the wedding. I came downstairs that morning hoping stupidly, hoping for a cake or a card, or even just an acknowledgement. Instead, I found Eleanor and Chloe at the kitchen table, surrounded by shopping bags from designer stores I could not even dream of entering. They were planning Chloe's sweet 16 party, which was still 4 months away. When I asked about my birthday, Eleanor barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, Ava, I forgot. You understand, right? We have been so busy with the new house arrangements. Maybe we can do something small next week." Next week never came. Chloe's party, however, was a 300-person extravaganza at a country club with a live band and a red carpet entrance. That set the pattern for the next 6 years. Chloe got everything: new car for her 18th birthday while I took the bus. Full ride to college paid by Richard while I worked those 2 jobs to afford community college classes. Designer clothes while I shopped at thrift stores. But the worst part was not the material things. It was the way Eleanor looked at her versus the way she looked at me. With Chloe, there was warmth, pride, genuine affection. With me, there was tolerance at best, contempt at worst. Richard died 2 years ago in a boating accident, and whatever thin veneer of civility Eleanor had maintained for his sake evaporated completely. She inherited everything because apparently my father's will had been contested and overturned years ago, something I only discovered much later. Suddenly, I went from being barely tolerated to being actively resented. Every time Eleanor looked at me, I could see the calculation in her eyes. I was taking up space that Chloe needed. I was costing money that could go to Chloe's lifestyle. I was a living, breathing reminder of the man Eleanor had clearly never loved. Then Chloe met Mark. Mark Davidson was everything Eleanor dreamed of for her precious daughter. 28 years old, heir to a real estate empire, devastatingly handsome in that cold, calculated way that should have been a red flag. He moved into our house within 3 months of meeting Chloe, and that was when things went from bad to unbearable. Mark looked at me like I was dirt on his expensive Italian shoes. He made comments about how I should be grateful for the roof over my head, how I should contribute more since I was not actually family. Eleanor agreed with every word. I tried to make myself smaller, quieter, less of a burden. I took extra shifts at work and stayed out of the house as much as possible. I ate less so there would be more food for them. I did all the cleaning, all the laundry, anything to prove I was earning my keep. But it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough. 3 months before that text message, Eleanor sat me down at the kitchen table. Chloe and Mark were there too, and the way they all looked at me made my skin crawl. Eleanor's voice was calm, businesslike, like she was negotiating a contract. Ava, Mark, and Chloe are getting engaged. They want to start their life together here in this house. They need space. They need to be able to grow as a couple without distractions. I remember asking what she meant by distractions, even though I already knew. Eleanor's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. You are 22 years old. Most girls your age have already moved out. It is time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. We will give you 6 months to find a place. 6 months sounded reasonable until I did the math. With the 60% of my income going to Eleanor, I had been barely saving $200 a month. After 6 months, I would have $1,200. In our city, that was not even enough for a security deposit on a studio apartment. I tried to explain this to Eleanor, tried to ask if maybe I could keep more of my paycheck to save faster. Her response was to increase my contribution to 75%. For the good of the family, she said. To teach me about real-world responsibilities. I spiraled into panic. I looked into roommate situations, but my work schedule was so erratic that most people did not want to deal with me. I looked into cheaper neighborhoods, places where $1,200 might stretch further, but they were hours away from my jobs. I was trapped in a nightmare of my mother's design, and she knew it. She knew exactly what she was doing. The cruelty escalated. Mark started making jokes about me being a freeloader, always within Eleanor's hearing, always met with her indulgent laughter. Chloe stopped acknowledging my existence entirely, walking past me in hallways like I was a ghost. They had friends over, constantly parties that stretched late into the night, and when I asked them to keep it down because I had to work early the next morning, Mark told me if I did not like the noise, I could leave. Eleanor nodded her agreement. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, and because some pathetic part of me still believed that if I could just hold on a little longer, something would change. Maybe Eleanor would remember that she used to be my mother. Maybe Chloe would remember that we used to be friends before Richard, before everything fell apart. Maybe I would wake up and this would all be a bad dream. Then came the night that destroyed me completely. It was a Thursday, and I had just finished a double shift at the restaurant. I was exhausted, my feet were killing me, and I wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed. When I got home around 11 at night, the house was dark, except for the light in the living room. I heard voices, Eleanor and Chloe, talking in those low conspiratorial tones that always meant they were planning something. I should have gone straight upstairs. I should have minded my own business. But I heard my name, and I froze in the hallway, hidden in the shadows, listening to my mother and stepsister discuss my future like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person. Eleanor's voice was cold and clinical. The 6 months are almost up, and she has not made any effort to move out. I knew she would not. She is too weak, too dependent. Always has been. Chloe laughed that high tinkling laugh that used to make me feel inferior. So what are you going to do, Mom? You cannot just throw her out. People will talk. There was a pause, and then Eleanor said the words that would echo in my mind for months. Actually, I can. I have been documenting everything. Her lack of contribution despite having 2 jobs, her inability to maintain her own space, her general failure to launch. If anyone asks, I will say I gave her every opportunity, but she refused to take responsibility for her own life. Besides, who would believe her side of the story? She has no one. Her father's family cut ties years ago, and she has not maintained any real friendships because she is too busy playing the martyr. My heart stopped. My mother, the woman who was supposed to love me unconditionally, had been building a case against me, documenting my failures, planning to paint me as the villain in a story where I was barely surviving. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was Chloe's response. That is actually pretty smart, Mom. Get rid of the dead weight and look like the victim. I am impressed. They laughed together, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked. A tiny fissure in the wall I had built around my heart, the wall that let me pretend everything was okay. I went upstairs that night and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I did not cry. I was too numb for tears. I just kept replaying their words over and over, trying to understand how I had let it get this bad. How I had let myself become so small, so invisible, that my own mother could discuss disposing of me like I was trash. The next few weeks were a blur. I went through the motions of work, of cleaning, of existing, but inside I was hollow. I started making quiet preparations, researching shelters and social services, looking into emergency housing options. I opened a new bank account that Eleanor did not know about and started depositing my paychecks there, telling her I had gotten my hours cut. She believed it without question because she never actually cared about the details of my life. I also started looking for something my father had mentioned once, years ago, in one of our late-night talks, after Mom had been particularly cruel. He told me he kept records of everything, a journal of sorts, hidden in his old workshop in the garage. Mom never went in there, said it was too dusty, too full of painful memories. But I knew exactly where it was, tucked behind a loose board in the wall. I found it 3 weeks before everything exploded. It was a simple black notebook, weathered and worn, but the information inside was explosive. Page after page of records showing Eleanor's spending habits, discrepancies in household accounts, evidence of her siphoning money from joint accounts before Dad's death. He had been building his own case, planning to leave her, and then he died before he could act on it. But the most damning entries were from after his death. Dad had left me everything in his original will. The house, his savings, his life insurance, all of it held in trust until I turned 21. But Eleanor had the will contested, claiming Dad was not of sound mind due to stress. She won because she had money for better lawyers, and I had no one to advocate for me. The house that should have been mine became hers. The money that should have secured my future paid for Chloe's extravagant lifestyle. My father had known. He had documented everything, and he had hidden it away, maybe hoping I would find it someday. And now I had it, proof of what Eleanor had stolen from me. But what could I do with it? I was 22, broke, and living on the edge of homelessness. Going to court would take money I did not have and time I could not afford. I decided to keep it hidden, tucked into the lining of my winter coat, the one piece of clothing I knew I would take with me wherever I ended up. It felt like having a piece of my father with me, his last attempt to protect me, even from beyond the grave. Then came the night everything changed. It was 2 a.m. on a cold Tuesday in March. I was deep asleep, exhausted from working a double shift followed by 4 hours of data entry, when my bedroom door slammed open with a crash that jolted me awake. The lights flicked on, blinding me, and I heard Eleanor's voice, sharp and cruel. "Get up, pack your things. You have 10 minutes. I sat up, disoriented and confused, my heart racing. Eleanor stood in the doorway in an expensive silk nightgown, her face twisted in contempt. Behind her, I could see Chloe in matching silk and Mark, his hulking form, blocking any chance of escape. They looked like a firing squad. "What?" I managed to croak out, my voice thick with sleep and fear. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor strode into the room and threw an empty suitcase at me. It landed on the bed with a thud, cheap and flimsy, probably something she had grabbed from storage. I said, "Pack. You are leaving, tonight, right now." "But why?" "What did I do? I paid you this month. I cleaned the whole house yesterday. I have been trying so hard to stay out of your way." I hated how my voice came out thin and desperate, but I could not help it. This was happening too fast, and I could not understand why. Eleanor laughed, and it was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. "Your mistake was existing, Ava. Taking up space that Chloe and Mark need. Breathing air that cost me money. Being a constant reminder of a man I was glad to be rid of." She picked up the framed photo on my nightstand, the only picture I had of my father, and threw it across the room. The glass shattered against the wall, and I flinched like she had hit me. "Your father was weak, and you are just like him. Pathetic, clingy, unable to stand on your own 2 feet. You took everything from me," I whispered, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Satisfaction. She wanted me to know. She wanted me to understand that she had orchestrated all of this, that every moment of my suffering had been intentional. "You stole my inheritance. You made sure I could never save enough to leave. You turned Chloe against me. You have been planning this from the beginning." Eleanor smiled, and it was beautiful and terrible. "Of course I did. Did you really think I was going to let some bastard child take what should have belonged to me and my daughter? Your father was a fool with his little noble intentions, but he is dead, and I won. I always win." Mark stepped forward then, and I instinctively pressed myself against the headboard. He was so much bigger than me, and there was something predatory in his eyes. "You heard her," he said, his voice low and threatening. pack your shit and get out. We are done being nice. Nice! The word came out as a broken laugh. You call this nice? You had a roof over your head, did you not? Food in your stomach. We could have tossed you out years ago. Mark grabbed the photo album from my desk, the one with pictures of Dad and me, and tore it in half. Pages scattered across the floor like snow. Stop living in the past and move on. Though honestly, I do not know who would want you. Chloe giggled from the doorway, and that sound more than anything else broke something fundamental inside me. This was the girl I had tried to be a sister to, the girl I had defended against school bullies, the girl I had taught to braid her hair and paint her nails. And she was laughing at my destruction. 10 minutes, Eleanor repeated. Or we call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Your choice. I moved like a robot, pulling clothes from drawers and shoving them into the suitcase, without looking at what I was grabbing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip anything. I pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt over my pajamas, shoved my feet into sneakers. The whole time they watched me like I was entertainment, their faces lit with a combination of satisfaction and disdain. I reached for the wooden box with my father's watch, but Mark got there first. He opened it, looked at the watch, and pocketed it. Consider it payment for all those months of free rent you actually owe us. When I lunged for him, Eleanor grabbed my arm so hard I knew it would bruise. Touch him and I will make sure you are arrested for assault. Try me. I grabbed my winter coat, the one with Dad's journal hidden in the lining, and my small bag with my work uniform. That was it. 22 years of life reduced to one suitcase and a coat. Eleanor grabbed my phone from the nightstand. I am paying for this plan. You can have it back when you get your own service. She pocketed it, and I felt the last thread connecting me to any semblance of normal life snap. They herded me downstairs and out to Eleanor's car. The neighborhood was dark and silent, everyone asleep in their warm beds, unaware that a girl was being discarded like garbage. Eleanor drove in silence for 20 minutes, while I sat in the back seat numb and disbelieving. This could not be happening. This could not be real. We pulled up in front of a run-down building with peeling paint and broken windows. A neon sign flickered weakly. City Haven Shelter. Eleanor got out, popped the trunk, and threw my suitcase onto the sidewalk. It burst open, scattering my clothes across the dirty concrete. Welcome home, she said with mock sweetness. I paid for 1 week. After that, you are on your own. Do not call. Do not come back. As far as I am concerned, I never had a daughter named Ava. She got back in the car and drove away, her taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving me standing alone on a street I did not recognize, in a city that suddenly felt impossibly large and hostile. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The March wind cut through my coat, and I realized I was crying, hot tears streaming down my face, dripping onto the scattered clothes at my feet. A woman emerged from the shelter, older, with kind eyes and a weary expression. Come on, honey, she said gently. Let's get you inside before you freeze. Her name was Sarah, and she was the director of City Haven. She helped me gather my clothes, led me to a small room with 4 bunk beds, 3 of them already occupied by sleeping women. My bed was the top bunk in the corner, a thin mattress with threadbare sheets. Sarah handed me a towel and a small toiletry kit. Bathroom is down the hall. Lights out was 2 hours ago, so keep quiet. Breakfast is at 7, and then we will talk about your situation. She squeezed my shoulder, a small gesture of kindness that made me want to sob and left me alone in the dark. I climbed into the bunk, fully clothed, and lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of strangers breathing around me. This was my life now. 22 years old and homeless because my mother had decided I was not worth keeping. The worst part was not the shock or the fear, or even the devastating sense of abandonment. It was the tiny voice in my head, the one that sounded like Eleanor telling me I deserved this. I reached into my coat and felt the outline of my father's journal through the lining. It was the only thing I had left that proved I had come from somewhere, that I had been loved once, even if the person who loved me was gone. I fell asleep clutching that coat like a lifeline, and when I woke up the next morning to harsh fluorescent lights and the smell of institutional breakfast, I made a decision. Eleanor thought she had destroyed me. She thought she had won, but she had made one critical mistake. She had given me nothing left to lose. The first week at City Haven was brutal. Sarah's kindness turned out to be tempered with steel. She sat me down on my second day and laid out the rules. This is not a hotel. You work, you contribute, or you leave. We do not tolerate self-pity, and we do not accept excuses. You got dealt a bad hand. Okay, What are you going to do about it? I wanted to hate her for being so harsh, but I could see in her eyes that this was how she had survived whatever had brought her here, and this was how she was going to make sure I survived too. I found out later that Sarah had been homeless herself for 3 years after escaping an abusive marriage. She had built City Haven from nothing, fought the city for funding, and turned it into a place that did not just offer shelter, but demanded transformation. She did not want to save us. She wanted to teach us to save ourselves. My first task was finding work. I called my old restaurant from a payphone in the shelter, using the coins Sarah lent me, but they had already replaced me. Same with the data entry company. Missing a week without notice had cost me both jobs, just like Eleanor had known it would. I spent days walking from business to business, filling out applications facing rejection after rejection. No permanent address, no phone number, no references. I was unhireable. Then I met Gus. His diner was small and shabby, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The help wanted sign in the window looked like it had been there for months. I walked in during the lunch rush, and Gus, a man in his 60s with a permanent scowl and hands scarred from decades of kitchen work, barely looked up from the grill. "You here to eat or to work?" "Work," I said, hating how desperate I sounded. "I will do anything, dishes, cleaning, whatever you need." He studied me for a long moment, taking in my second-hand clothes and the defeated slump of my shoulders. "You on drugs?" I shook my head. "Running from the law." Another shake. "Got anywhere to be at night?" I hesitated, then told him the truth. "I am staying at City Haven Shelter." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition or maybe respect. "Sarah's place. Good woman, tough as nails." He wiped his hands on his apron. "You show up on time, work hard, and don't steal from me, you got a job. Minimum wage tips split between front and back of house. 8-hour shifts 6 days a week. Start tomorrow at 5 in the morning." I could have kissed him. Instead, I just knotted my throat too tight to speak. Gus turned back to the grill, then paused. "And kid, whatever put you in that shelter, use it. Get angry, get determined, but don't get stuck there. I have seen too many people get stuck." I worked like my life depended on it, because it did. 5 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, scrubbing dishes until my hands were raw, mopping floors, hauling trash, learning the rhythm of the diner. The work was hard and hot and endless, but it was mine. I was earning my own money, making my own way, and slowly, very slowly, I started to feel like a person again instead of the ghost Eleanor had tried to turn me into. After my shifts, I would go to the public library and use their computers. I researched legal aid services, tenant rights, anything that might help me understand what had been done to me and what I could do about it. That was when I discovered that the statute of limitations on contesting a will in my state was 5 years, and it had been 7 years since my father's death. Eleanor had timed it perfectly. Even with Dad's journal as evidence, I had no legal recourse. The house was hers, the money was hers, everything was hers. But the journal documented something else, something current and actionable. In the months before his death, my father had noticed irregularities in Eleanor's charity work. She volunteered with a foundation that helped homeless families, and she had access to donation accounts. Dad had flagged several suspicious transfers, money that should have gone to families in need, but instead seemed to disappear. He had made notes to investigate further, but then he died, and the investigation died with him. I started digging deeper, using my library time to look up the foundation. It was still active, and Eleanor was now the director. Her face smiled at me from the website, posed in front of families she claimed to have helped children she pretended to care about. The foundation held an annual gala that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. Looking at the photos from previous years made me physically ill. There was Eleanor in designer gowns accepting awards for her humanitarian work. There was Chloe volunteering at events, her Instagram full of selfies with underprivileged kids, hashtags about giving back and making a difference. They were using the very situation they had forced me into as a prop for their public image. Eleanor, the champion of the homeless who had thrown her own daughter onto the street. The hypocrisy was staggering, and it lit a fire in me that burned away the last remnants of the girl who had hoped for her mother's love. I needed help, someone with the skills and resources to expose what Eleanor was doing. That was when I remembered Ben Carter. He had come into Gus's diner a few times, always alone, always hunched over his laptop with a coffee that he barely touched. Gus had mentioned once that Ben was an investigative journalist for the local paper, the kind who went after corruption and made powerful people nervous. One day during my break, I sat down across from him. He looked up startled, and I saw the caution in his eyes. People probably bothered him all the time with their stories. "I need 5 minutes of your time," I said before he could dismiss me. "I have a story about fraud and a public figure stealing from a homeless charity. If you are not interested, I will leave you alone." His eyes sharpened with interest, and he gestured to the seat. 5 minutes, starting now. I told him everything. Eleanor throwing me out, my father's journal, the foundation, and the suspicious transfers. I showed him screenshots I had taken at the library of the foundation's financial reports, public documents that showed huge discrepancies between donations received and aid distributed. When my 5 minutes were up, Ben was taking notes. "This is big if it is true, but I need proof, real proof. Bank records, internal documents, something that connects your mother directly to the missing money. I know where she might keep it," I said, my heart racing. "My father used to have a safe in his workshop. Eleanor never goes in there. If he documented the transfers before he died, the access codes might still work." Ben leaned back, studying me. "You understand what you are asking to do here? Breaking into her house is illegal. If you get caught, you will go to jail and your mother will be the victim. Again." I met his eyes, and I knew he saw something there that convinced him I was serious. "She already destroyed my life. She took everything from me, and now she is using people like me, people she put on the street to make herself look good while she steals from them. I do not care what happens to me. I care about stopping her." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will help you, but we do this right. We plan it carefully, we get everything we need in one shot, and we make sure it stands up in court. And Ava," he waited until I looked at him, "when this is over, you need to decide if you are doing this for justice or for revenge, because one of those will destroy you as much as it destroys her." Planning the break-in took 2 weeks. Ben used his resources to figure out Eleanor's schedule. Every Friday night, she and Chloe attended a networking dinner that lasted until at least 11. Mark usually went to his poker game. That gave us a 4-hour window. Gus, who I had confided in because I needed someone to know where I was in case something went wrong, reluctantly put me in touch with an old friend who could deal with locks. "I am not asking questions," Gus said gruffly. "But if you end up in jail, do not expect me to bail you out." The night we chose was cold and rainy, which Ben said was perfect, because people paid less attention in bad weather. He drove me to my old neighborhood, and seeing those familiar streets filled me with a complex mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, bitter nostalgia for a home that had never really been mine. We parked 2 blocks away and walked to the house, hooded jackets pulled low, looking like any other people hurrying through the rain. The workshop was accessed through a side door that was hidden from the street by overgrown bushes Dad had planted years ago. The lock was old, and Gus's friend had taught me enough that I was able to pick it after 3 tries that felt like 3 hours. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the tools. Ben stood watch, his body tense, ready to run if we heard anything. Inside the workshop was exactly as I remembered it. Dusty and dim, lit only by our flashlights, full of Dad's tools and half-finished projects. The safe was built into the floor under his workbench, hidden beneath a loose board. I knelt down and tried the combination I remembered him using for everything my birthday. The safe did not open. I tried Eleanor's birthday, though it made me sick to think he would use it. Nothing. Then I tried the date he and I had scattered his mother's ashes at the lake, a day he had said was about saying goodbye and moving forward. The safe clicked open. Inside were documents, so many documents. Bank statements going back years, printouts of emails between Eleanor and someone named Thomas Crane, who I later learned was the foundation's accountant. The emails were damning, full of coded language about redirecting funds, creative accounting, and keeping certain transactions off the official books. There were spreadsheets showing that out of the $3 million the foundation had raised over the past 5 years, less than a third had actually gone to helping families. The rest had been funneled into personal accounts used to pay for Eleanor and Chloe's lifestyle, invested in properties under shell company names. My father had documented everything, had been building a case, and Eleanor must have known. Maybe that was why his death had been so convenient for her. I pushed that thought away because it was too dark, too terrible to consider in that moment. Ben was photographing everything with a camera that did not make noise, working with quick efficiency. "This is incredible," he whispered. "This is enough to bring her down. We need to go, now." We closed the safe, replaced the board, and locked the workshop door behind us. The walk back to the car felt like a mile instead of 2 blocks. Every sound made my heart jump. Every car that passed felt like the police coming to arrest us. But we made it. Ben drove to his apartment, and we spent the next 6 hours going through every document, organizing them, scanning them, building an airtight case. "I am going to write the story," Ben said as dawn broke outside his windows. "But I am going to need your testimony. You're going to have to go on record about what she did to you. Are you prepared for that? For everyone to know your story?" I thought about that. About exposing myself, my pain, my humiliation. About Eleanor and Chloe seeing my face in the paper, reading about how they had destroyed me. About the whole city knowing I had been thrown away by my own mother. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt calm. If it stops her from hurting anyone else, yes. I will tell everyone. The story ran 3 weeks later, and it was devastating. Ben was a brilliant writer, and he structured the article perfectly. It started with the foundation, the missing money, the families who had been turned away when the foundation claimed they were out of funds. Then it revealed Eleanor as the director showed the documents proving fraud. And then in the final section it told my story. How the champion of the homeless had made her own daughter homeless. How she had stolen my inheritance and used it to fund her charity work, creating a perfect circle of exploitation. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Eleanor's face was everywhere on television, in newspapers, across social media. People were outraged. The police launched an investigation. The foundation's board suspended her pending a full audit. Donors demanded their money back. Sponsors pulled their support. Everything Eleanor had built, every carefully crafted lie, came crashing down. The night the story broke, I was working at the diner. Gus had the news on the small television behind the counter, and when Eleanor's photo appeared, he glanced at me. "That your mother?" I nodded, unable to look away from the screen. He grunted. "Good. Some people need to face consequences." A customer at the counter, an older woman who had been coming in for years, looked between the television and me. "Wait, you are that girl, the daughter." I braced myself for judgment, but she reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "You are very brave, honey. Very brave." Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded. Eleanor was charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Her assets were frozen. The house was seized as evidence. Chloe, who had been listed as an employee of the foundation despite never actually working there, was being investigated for complicity. Mark broke up with Chloe, immediately proving that his interest had only ever been in the money and status she represented. I did not attend the court hearings. Ben kept me updated, but I did not need to see Eleanor in handcuffs to feel vindicated. Knowing that the truth was out, that people saw her for what she really was, that was enough. I focused on my own life, on rebuilding myself, piece by piece. Sarah helped me get into a transitional housing program for young adults. I moved into a small studio apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. My name on the lease, my key in the door. I cried the first night I spent there, lying on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by the few possessions I owned and feeling more at home than I ever had in Eleanor's house. Gus promoted me to shift manager, which came with a raise that let me start saving money for the first time in my life. I enrolled in community college classes studying business administration, thinking maybe someday I could do something meaningful with my experiences. Ben and I became friends, real friends. He saw me not as a victim or a story, but as a person, and that meant more than I could express. We met for coffee once a week, and he would tell me about other investigations he was working on, while I told him about my classes and my plans. There was nothing romantic between us, just a deep respect and genuine care. He had given me something I desperately needed, proof that not everyone would hurt me, that some people could be trusted. 4 months after the story broke, I was at the diner during the evening shift when they walked in. Eleanor and Chloe. I almost did not recognize them. Eleanor, who had always been impeccably dressed, wore a cheap polyester suit that hung wrong on her frame. Her hair, usually professionally styled, was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked 10 years older, her face gaunt and lined with stress. Chloe was even worse, her designer clothes replaced with discount store basics, her confident posture replaced with a hunched, defeated slouch. They looked around the diner with the desperation of people who had fallen far and did not know how to get back up. They spotted me behind the counter, and I saw Eleanor's face go through a rapid series of emotions: shock, anger, and then, most surprising of all, hope. They approached the counter slowly, like they were approaching a wild animal that might bolt. The diner was busy, full of regular customers who did not know who these women were or what they had done to me. I wiped down the counter, keeping my movements calm and controlled, and waited. Eleanor spoke first, and her voice cracked with emotion I was not sure was genuine. "Ava, please, we need to talk." I looked up, then met her eyes, and saw something I had never seen before. Eleanor was afraid. Afraid of me, afraid of her future, afraid of being exactly where she had put me. "We can order here or at a table. What would you like?" My voice was professional, emotionless. "No, you don't understand. We have nowhere to go. Everything is gone. The house, the money, all of it frozen or taken. We have been staying in a motel, but we ran out of money. We are being evicted tomorrow. Ava, you are the only person we can turn to. You have to help us." Chloe was crying now, big dramatic tears that might have moved me once. "Please, Ava, we are sorry. We made mistakes, we know that, but we are family. You cannot just abandon family." The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Family, the word she had stripped from me, now being used to manipulate me into saving her. Around us, the diner had gone quiet. Gus was watching from the kitchen, his hand near the phone in case I needed him to call the police. Other customers were pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. I set down the rag I had been using and looked at Eleanor and Chloe, really looked at them. I tried to find some remnant of compassion, some thread of the girl I had been, who would have done anything to make her mother happy. But that girl was gone. She had died in a shelter bed at 2 a.m, and the woman who had taken her place knew better than to set herself on fire to keep others warm. "Do you remember what you said to me the night you threw me out?" I asked quietly. Eleanor flinched. "You said that my mistake was existing, that I was a burden you were glad to be rid of. You said I had 10 minutes to pack my entire life, and then you dumped me at a shelter and told me never to contact you again. You made it very clear that we were not family, that we had never been family." I was angry. Eleanor started, but I held up my hand. "You stole my inheritance. You used my father's death to enrich yourself. You forced me to give you most of my paycheck, while working 2 jobs, ensuring I could never save enough to leave. You threw me out to make room for Chloe's boyfriend. And then, and this is the part I cannot get past, you used my homelessness as a platform to raise money that you stole. You built your reputation on the suffering of people like me, people you created." My voice was still calm, still professional, but everyone in the diner could hear the steel underneath. "You did not make a mistake, Eleanor. You made a choice. Hundreds of choices. Every single day you chose to be cruel." Chloe was sobbing openly now. "But we apologized. We said we were sorry. What more do you want from us?" I poured 2 glasses of water and set them on the counter. "I want you to understand something. When you threw me out, I had nothing. No money, no home, no support system. I was terrified and alone, and I thought I might not survive. But I did survive. I worked harder than I ever thought possible. I learned to value myself even when everyone else thought I was worthless. I built a life from absolute zero, and I did it without you, without anyone." I slid the glasses toward them. "The water is free. That is all you are getting from me. Not because I am cruel, but because I finally understand that I do not owe you anything. Not my forgiveness, not my help, and certainly not my future." Eleanor's face transformed. The fear became rage, the mask slipping to reveal the woman I knew all too well. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I did for you, I gave you a home for 22 years. I fed you and clothed you, and this is how you repay me, by destroying my life." I met her anger with calm certainty. "No, Eleanor, I told the truth. You destroyed your own life by being a fraud and a thief. I just made sure people knew about it." "We could die out there," Chloe said, her voice shrill. "We could end up on the streets and you would be responsible." I felt Gus move up beside me, his presence solid and protective. "I am going to have to ask you ladies to leave," he said, his voice gruff but firm. "Ava has made it clear she has nothing to say to you, and you are disturbing my other customers." Eleanor looked around the diner at the faces watching her with varying degrees of sympathy and disgust. And I saw the moment she realized she had no power here. She was not the director of anything, not the lady of a grand house, not someone whose word carried weight. She was just another person who had made terrible choices and was facing the consequences. "This isn't over," she hissed at me. "I will find a way to make you pay for what you have done." Actually, Ben's voice came from behind them, and we all turned to see him standing in the doorway. His phone held up and recording, "It is over, and if you harass Ava again, I will make sure this video and everything else I have documented about your behavior since the charges were filed becomes very public. I suspect your lawyers would prefer you keep a low profile right now." Eleanor and Chloe left without another word, and the diner erupted in scattered applause. I felt my legs go weak, and Gus caught my elbow. "Sit down before you fall down," he ordered, guiding me to a stool. Someone bought me a soda. Another customer told me I had done the right thing. Ben sat beside me, putting his phone away. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, surprised to find that I was. Seeing them had not broken me. Their desperation had not manipulated me into feeling guilty. I had stood my ground, and I had done it without cruelty, without sinking to their level. I had simply told the truth and held firm to my boundaries. "I am okay," I said and meant it. Eleanor was eventually convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. Chloe was given probation and community service, her involvement deemed minimal. The foundation was dissolved and the remaining funds were distributed to legitimate charities. I testified at the trial, and walking into that courtroom to tell my story to a judge and jury was one of the hardest things I ever did. But it was also freeing. Every word I spoke was another weight lifted from my shoulders, another piece of the past I was finally able to put down. A year after that night in the diner, I was standing in front of a newly renovated building. It had been an abandoned warehouse, but through a combination of grants, donations, and tireless work by Sarah and other advocates, it had been transformed into a comprehensive support center for young adults experiencing homelessness. It offered not just beds, but job training, mental health services, legal aid, and educational support. Everything I wished had been available to me when I was at my lowest. The center was being named after my father, the Mitchell Center for Young Adult Services. Sarah had suggested it, saying that the money from the fraud case restitution fund, which had been partially returned to me as his heir, should go towards something that honored his memory. I had agreed immediately. Dad would have loved knowing that his legacy was helping kids who had nowhere else to turn. Ben stood beside me as we waited for the ribbon-cutting ceremony to begin. Our friendship had deepened over the months, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. He had covered the center's development in several articles, bringing attention and donations. "Your dad would be proud," he said quietly, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "I hope so. I hope he knows that something good came out of all the pain." A young woman approached us, then probably 18 or 19, with a backpack over her shoulder and fear in her eyes. She looked at the building, then at me. "Is this the Mitchell Center, the one that helps people?" I smiled at her, remembering the terrified girl I had been a year ago. "It is. Are you looking for help?" She nodded, and I saw her lower lip tremble. "I do not have anywhere to go. My mom kicked me out, and I have been staying with friends, but I cannot anymore. I am scared." I stepped forward and gently touched her shoulder. "You do not have to be scared anymore. You are exactly where you need to be. Come on, let me introduce you to Sarah. She's going to help you figure out your next steps." As I led her toward the entrance, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain and betrayal and absolute darkness of that night when Eleanor threw me out, the grinding poverty and exhaustion of those first months, the slow, painful process of learning to believe in myself again, the courage it took to fight back, to demand justice, to refuse to be a victim. Eleanor had tried to destroy me because she thought I was weak, that I would crumble under the weight of her cruelty. She had been wrong. Not because I was naturally strong, but because I had learned that strength is not something you are born with. It is something you choose every single day when giving up would be easier. It is getting up at 5 in the morning to scrub dishes when your hands are cracked and bleeding. It is saying no when someone tries to make you responsible for their choices. It is telling your truth even when it makes you vulnerable. It is deciding that you are worth fighting for even if no one else ever told you that you were. The center opened its doors, and over the following months, we helped dozens of young people find their footing. Every time I saw one of them land their first job, move into their own apartment, or smile with genuine hope, I felt my father's presence. This was his legacy, not the house or the money Eleanor had stolen, but this. The idea that people deserved a second chance, that everyone had value, that with the right support, anyone could rebuild their life. I graduated from community college and got accepted to a 4-year university on a scholarship for students who had experienced homelessness. I was studying social work, wanting to formalize my ability to help others navigate the systems I had learned so intimately. Gus threw me a graduation party at the diner, and half the city seemed to show up. Sarah gave a speech that made me cry. Ben gave me a journal, a nice leather-bound one, and told me I should write my own story someday. Maybe I would. I never saw Eleanor again after her sentencing. I heard through Ben that she was struggling in prison, that the other inmates did not take kindly to someone who had stolen from homeless families. I felt nothing about that. Not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. She was no longer a part of my life, and I had done my grieving for the mother I had wanted her to be. The woman she actually was had never deserved my love or loyalty. Chloe reached out once a year into Eleanor's sentence, an email long and rambling full of apologies and excuses and requests to meet. She wanted forgiveness. She wanted a relationship. She wanted me to understand that she had been influenced by Eleanor, that she had not really meant any of it. I read the email twice, thought about it for a week, and then sent a short reply. I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. But forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. I hope you build a good life for yourself, but it will be a life without me in it. Please do not contact me again. She respected that, or maybe she just realized I meant it. Either way, she left me alone. As I sit here now 2 years after that midnight shock that changed everything, I can honestly say I am happy. Not in spite of what happened, but in some ways because of it. Eleanor's cruelty forced me to discover who I really was beneath all the people-pleasing and self-doubt. It forced me to learn skills I never would have developed if life had been easy. It forced me to understand that family is not about blood. It is about who shows up for you, who believes in you, who helps you become the person you are meant to be. My family now consists of Gus, who still grumbles at me but makes sure I eat properly. Sarah, who texts me motivational quotes at inappropriate hours. Ben, who has become one of my closest friends and biggest supporters. The other staff and volunteers at the Mitchell Center. The young people we help who teach me every day about resilience and hope. These are my people. This is my family. And I chose them and they chose me back, which makes it real in a way Eleanor's version of family never was. I learned that you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I learned that boundaries are not cruel, they are necessary. I learned that people will treat you exactly how you teach them to treat you. And if you accept mistreatment, they will keep giving it. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. I learned that you cannot control what other people do to you, but you can control who you become in response. And most importantly, I learned that I am enough exactly as I am without needing anyone's approval or permission to take up space in this world. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. If you are in a toxic relationship, whether with a parent, partner, or friend, your pain is real and your need to protect yourself is valid. You are not responsible for fixing people who hurt you. You are not obligated to sacrifice yourself on the altar of someone else's comfort. It is not cruel or selfish to choose yourself. In fact, sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do. If my story resonates with you, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. What toxic relationship have you had to leave behind? How did you find the strength to choose yourself? And if you found value in this story, please like and subscribe so I can continue sharing stories of survival and hope. Your support means everything, and remember, you are stronger than you know, and you deserve a life built on respect and genuine love.